Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we are going to take another look at Mars in Leo. This ingress of Mars in Leo has happened just this week, and we are now going to take a look at some of the upcoming themes of Mars's retrograde, which begins in Leo. Of course, the Mars retrograde will have a long period of time in which it moves through the sign of Cancer, which we've already spent some time talking about in a bunch of different previous episodes. We've done overviews and looking at the entirety of the Mars retrograde. We'll certainly continue to look at Mars and Cancer, but today I want to talk about some of the general themes of a Mars retrograde that are fitting regardless of what sign Mars is in, and then a few specific ideas as to what it might mean that Mars is starting its retrograde in Leo in the month of December, which we're getting a preview of now by virtue of Mars being in direct motion, moving through those early degrees of Leo, which it will shortly retrograde back through. So that is our agenda for today. Remember to like and subscribe. It helps our channel to grow. We really appreciate it. It's free to do so. We're seeing if we can get to 80,000 subscribers on the channel by the spring equinox. I'm trying to set some goals for ourselves so we kind of keep stoking the fire of growth, which we really appreciate all of you contributing to. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, nightlightastrology.com. And right now, check out on the events page, Live Talks, my webinar for November, Pluto into Aquarius, AI, Aliens, and New World Orders. This is going to be a fun look at the collective significance of Pluto moving back into Aquarius to stay now for the next 20 years. We'll also be looking backward at the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, which happened during the American and French revolutions, other things that were happening that were very interesting during that period of time. And we'll be reflecting on what it might mean for us both personally and collectively that Pluto is moving into Aquarius to stay. So that's November 21st. If you can't attend the live webinar when you sign up, you'll get the recording link afterward. And then finally, on courses page, go to the first year course. You still have a little bit of time to sign up for the upcoming class, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. Our first year class in Ancient Hellenistic Astrology begins November 16th, happening right under the Pluto into Aquarius signature. This is a great election for entering into an apprenticeship with astrology, whether you want to practice professionally or you're just doing it to deepen your own hobby and interest in astrology. Take advantage of the need-based tuition, which you'll find at the bottom. Click apply now. And if you are needing a little bit of help to make the program happen, we have a sliding scale that you can work with, and that is still available all the way up to the start of the program. Classes are beginning next weekend, so you have just about 1 week left to take advantage of this. After I sign off today, you will find an informational video about the program, so you can learn more about everything the program includes, and all the information is also present on this page here, including a little interview video we have with some alumni from the program. So check that out. I hope to see you guys in class soon, and stick around after I sign off today for an informational video about the program. Okay, on that note, let us now shift our attention to the real-time clock and Mars here in Leo. So I have brought this up to the moment that Mars is turning retrograde. This is about December 6th. You can see the little S coming under Mars there in Leo. Let me just circle it in case you can't see it. There we go. And retrograding by the 8th. So right around the 6th to the 8th is where we see that change of direction for Mars. Now that's happening at the 6th degree of Leo. If we back this up just a little bit, what we are going to find is that today, as we're looking at this, we have Mars at just the 1st degree of Leo, coming off from the opposition to Pluto. And Mars moving through the sign of Leo will take place between now and early December. So about a month of Mars just kind of hanging out here in Leo and then turning retrograde. This is important because today what I want to do is I want to give you 5 themes to watch for when it comes to Mars retrograde themes in general. And then I want to include a few little thoughts that will act as some foreshadowing for what this Mars retrograde might mean, given that it's starting in Leo and the first couple of weeks there. It is turning retrograde and moving through Leo before spending a huge amount of time in Cancer, which we will revisit again down the road. But for today, let's focus on the Leo portion of it. And I'm going to do some horoscopes for you in another video as well, just to focus on the whole sign house that Leo is in your birth chart. So today I want to talk about 5 Mars retrograde themes that you can watch for. Again, this is sort of regardless of, what sign it's in. This would be applicable for really any Mars retrograde in general. And I am going to open up a program that I'm going to use to show you something really cool. It's called Starry Night Pro, and it is an astronomy program that I like to use in my classrooms. We'll see if I can use it without it kind of crashing things, because sometimes it does that. But here, I'm going to move it over to my other screen. Here we go. All right, so let's see if I can get this going now. I think you guys will appreciate this because it really helps to see. So this is my astronomy program called Starry Night Pro. Now, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to artificially hide the daylight so we can get it. There's the sun in the night. That's kind of weird looking. But anyway, I'm going to go down now. I'm going to add in the ecliptic, which is the green line you'll see here that marks out the zodiac. That is the path of the sun that defines the zodiac. I am going to add in zodiac constellations. Now, these are going to be measured in, but these are going to look like, sidereals. So we're not using these to map out the sections of the zodiac. Tropical zodiac measures according to the equinoxes and solstices, not the constellations. Although we keep the original constellations as symbolic, of symbolic significance, since that was where the constellations were when the zodiac first came around. So I'm going to add in the meridian, and then why don't we add in, where we go? Here we go. Let's add in some planets. And here you can see Mars. So what I want to show you is what it looks like. Let's see here. Here it is. Here's a Mars retrograde. This is what Mars looks like when it slows down in retrogrades. There you go. And then it makes a little loop-de-loop like that. That's from our geocentric perspective. So Mars is moving through direct motion, as you see here. And the sun is, of course, moving faster than Mars. So occasionally the sun will conjoin Mars. And then when it gets enough distance from Mars, usually around the whole sign trine from Mars, Mars will start slowing down. And you'll see it. You'll be able to perceive it here in this image. There it is slowing. And then it turns retrograde. And then direct motion, and it comes back. See how it makes that little loop-de-loop? So as Mars is moving along in direct motion through the zodiac like this, this is considered Mars with its own power, under its own volition, moving according to its own steam, its own direction, its own intentions, with its own agency. When it slows down, it is as though it is falling back into the primary motion of the sky. So what's really interesting about planets is that they are moving against the grain of the primary motion. Let me just see if I can show you this. And I'm going to stop. And now let us go to, let's see here. How do I go back to, let's go to, let me just pause this and I'll get it figured out. Okay, here we go. It took me a second to reset the view on the screen, but what I want to do now is show you what it looks like. So if I were to go hour by hour in a 24-hour day, watch where everything in the sky moves. It moves to its right-hand side. So you see how everything's rising in the east and setting in the west, all the constellations going through the sky in the same way. So that's called the primary motion, the diurnal motion. And that's caused by the rotation of the Earth on its axis, right? So pretty cool. Now, everything is moving in that way, and that's the swiftest, fastest motion. Nothing can move faster than that. Now, see Mars over here. There's Mars in that portion of the sky. Now, if we're going to advance this day at a time, watch how Mars is very, very gradually moving through the zodiac to the left. So Mars is moving this way through the zodiac, even though the primary motion of the sky whips everything in this direction around our perspective in 24 hours. But very gradually out in space, moving through the zodiac, the planets are moving against the grain of the primary motion. That's called secondary motion. So there's Mars. Now let's watch if we keep advancing this day at a time. We'll just move this perspective over here a little bit more. And gradually, what we're going to see happening, this is Mars now gradually turning retrograde and moving backward. And let's bring Mars up in the sky a little bit more so I can demonstrate this. Here we go. Here's Mars. So notice now, as Mars is moving through its retrogradation, that it's going to be moving backward through the zodiac from our perspective. You can see it very gradually moving toward the constellation of Gemini. See that? There it is, moving in. So the point is that when a planet is retrograde, suddenly it is as though rather than cutting against the grain of the primary motion going this way, it has now fallen into the primary motion, which is the same big fluid motion that carries everything in clockwise manner through the sky in a 24-hour period. That becomes a really important distinction, not only astronomically, but symbolically. Mars. What does Mars represent? And what does it mean from Mars going in its own direction, in its own course, against the grain of the primary motion versus falling back into it? Well, one of the things that is a part of the symbol of retrogradation for all planets that retrograde is that something larger than the planet itself takes over, and the god or goddess or archetypal field, as it were, is sort of subsumed by a force larger than itself. Generally speaking, the planets have the ability to represent different faculties in human life, of human experience, human character, human psychology and behavior. And in that way, they also represent the ongoing archetypal fields in and through which we are working with through our own free will. And when, like, for example, when Mercury turns retrograde, one of the things that happens is we often find that when it comes to mercurial things, we have less control. The schedule, the details, the organizational flow of a day, it suddenly feels as though our ability to navigate with our own volition the world of Mercury is very difficult. That's a common experience of Mercury retrograde, because we lose some agency with respect to the field, the archetypal field of Mercury, and the free will we have relative to it. So one of the meanings of a planet falling into the primary motion and losing its own volitional secondary motion is that it is as though the field represented is taken over by the larger hand of fate. Sometimes there are seasons in which there's nothing we can do. There's the amount of like agency we have, or the free will we have, is limited by circumstance. And the circumstances arising through things that we don't feel that we have any power or control over. Quite clearly, we don't, you know. So one of the things that any retrograde can point to is forces of circumstance, fate, destiny, or karma that are taking over and temporarily restraining or restricting or making it more difficult for us to freely move about with respect to the archetype. So again, if it's Mercury, your plane is late, you know, there's delays, the communication doesn't work, you know, the technology breaks down. When it comes to Mars, that breakdown, that some loss of agency or volition can show itself in a variety of really interesting ways. One of them is going to be through shifts in power. I have a certain amount of power, now I don't. I've lost a certain amount of strength or willpower or force or control or persuasion or influence over a situation. Some circumstance or shift or force or power larger than myself is making it feel like I don't have as much say. My will is not as effective, right? This is not the only thing that can happen, but it's one of them. So the other thing that can happen is we can feel disempowered. Now, on the other hand, the exact opposite thing can happen, where a Mars retrograde may temporarily shift with respect to our choices, our willpower, such that we're able to do more than we usually can. If we feel somewhat normally challenged in our ability to express our will, our agency, to effectively use energetic force in the world, if that feels compromised or thwarted, interestingly, a Mars retrograde can create almost the reverse, where there's suddenly a little bit more forcefulness or effectiveness available to us. It's really fascinating how that works. I'll never forget when I was coming out of the bhakti world, and I started using, and this is something I've talked about on my channel before, I started using testosterone replacement therapy, and it had a huge, huge positive impact on my health and sleep, energy, depression, all sorts of stuff that it really, really helped me with, because I had very low testosterone levels. And so a small therapeutic dose of testosterone I started taking as Mars turned retrograde, and it completely shifted everything. I mean, the physical transformation that you guys have seen me go through, and the ability to put on some muscle, those things came almost within 4 or 5 months while Mars was retrograde. I thought that was really fascinating. It also happened to be my natal Mars, so that's a little helpful too. But the point here that I'm trying to make, I'm just using myself as a story, is that it's not just that suddenly you become ineffective, or that you will lack willpower or effectiveness. Some people will experience what feels like a breakdown of their ability to utilize force, will, aggression, power, strength. They'll feel ineffective and disempowered. And other people, it will be the complete opposite. Where there's been disempowerment, there will be empowerment. And it's because we're really just talking about a larger circumstantial shift that's sort of out of our control taking place, that will either serve to amplify, enhance, or sometimes decrease or diminish the Mars function, or the sort of Mars feature of the psyche and of human psychology. You can read it that way. Many other examples of retrogrades that have nothing to do with our own psychology, or things that we could say are ours, right? So I'll talk about that a little bit more as well, but that's interesting, right? So think about that Mars falling back into the primary motion as shifts of power with respect to Mars, either more of it or less of it. And it's very different person to person, chart to chart, what that might look like. But there is a larger hand of destiny or fate shifting things with respect to how we experience power or disempowerment, and so on. Number 2 will be changes of direction or momentum with respect to Mars significations. So let's say that Mars represents ambition, or let's say that Mars represents sex drive, or let's say that Mars represents victory and accomplishment, or athleticism in the body, or brothers. Mars may also be correlated to the topics of any house that it's traveling through in your chart. And so if it's in your 10th house, Mars might be speaking to changes of direction or momentum in your career, changes of direction or momentum with respect to things like the body, or athleticism, or athletic performance, changes with respect of direction or momentum with respect to your sexual drive. It can also be Mars changing directions, and that retrograde can speak to change of momentum, as in I'm slowing down, I'm turning inward, I'm being less outwardly focused and ambitious, and more inwardly reflective, and maybe even thinking about the way in which I use power or will or force in the world and how effective it is. So it can also be like, okay, Mars is in the 7th house. There's going to be a change of direction or momentum when it retrogrades there with respect to your relationships. So you just think about Mars as an energy of momentum. When it's moving forward, it has a very centrifugal force behind it from the center moving outward. And when it turns inward, it is almost as though it signifies a shift towards something that's inward, or toward an involution of the will, or a decreasing of momentum, or sometimes it can be about a positive shift of momentum into a space that is less conflict oriented. And that's number 3. There can also be a disarming or weakening of Mars, such that conflicts die down. One of the things I love about Mars is how amazing it is for developing a better relationship with your anger, your irritation, or how easily you are frustrated, how you cope with or deal with anger or conflict. Mars retrogrades are often wonderful periods of time where the sort of hot-headed, impulsive, reactive qualities of Mars are muted, and a more refined or mature use or development of will can be accessed. I'll never forget one of the things that was like one of my most favorite breakthroughs that I had while Mars was retrograde in Gemini was going through a process of sort of like allowing myself to snap back at some trolly people. There's trolls, I don't know, whatever. We have trolls. When you're in social media and you do this every day, you get people who say shitty things. It's like part of the job. And so first, during the Mars retrograde, I allowed myself to sort of say something. Whereas before I always thought, well, you should never say anything that's just shallow, or it's not, rise above it or whatever. And then I needed a little time to be like, no, I'm not going to rise above it. You ass goblin. Shut up when you're talking to me. Shut your mouth when you're talking to me. and then as the retrograde went on, I was like, okay, I got that out of my system. I'm not going to address the trolls again. But now I'm doing it from a place that feels like I've actually realized the value in not responding, not that I'm just repressing the desire to respond. Do you see what I mean? It was I loved that learning process for me personally. That was really helpful. And since then, trolls can still get under my skin as a content creator, but not in the same way. Things really shifted. That was a Mars retrograde. That shifting of your relationship with anger, frustration, conflict. There's a classic text called The Art of War. It would be great if we thought that our life was supposed to be completely free of conflict and that the universe is a better place without conflict. And those are all great ideas, right? But it's not the reality. The reality is that conflict is a part of life, and it's actually a very creative part of life at its best. At its worst, obviously, it's very destructive and cruel and so forth. But how we relate to conflict, can we access conflict? Like, I even think of conflict energetically, like the clashing of notes in a musical scale. And Venus is about how we take that clash and move it toward resolution. I'm thinking of like when you hit a flat note in a blues scale or something, and that flat note or in jazz music can resolve itself in depending on the next note you play. So sometimes the Mars retrogrades are periods of time, oddly enough, that are kind of Venusian, in the sense that Mars is working on understanding the necessity of certain conflicts while also understanding when it's right to have them, how to have them, and how to have them in a way that works toward resolution, whether it's more constructive or useful. Even Mars retrograde is classic for athletes going through major periods of revision, for example, on their golf stroke or the mechanics of their shot in basketball. Mars retrogrades are periods of time in which you often just revise the way in which you fight or compete, or an athletic skill you perform. To get better at it means to refine it in some way, right? So, but it can also be that there's a disarming or weakening of Mars. That if you're a bully, suddenly maybe you have to experience getting bullied yourself. If you're someone who is perpetually scared to stand up for yourself, suddenly you find it's a little easier to do so. There'll be interesting reversals with respect to Mars, but some people will experience Mars getting weaker before it gets stronger, or Mars having to unwind the tension rather than react in the same old way. It's a fascinating signature. I find that when a malefic goes retrograde, especially Mars, where the retrogrades are a little bit more acute than the long-lasting Saturn retrogrades, you will find that the malefic is almost like it's like under the care and protection of larger forces, and so it's almost as though you can see a better, higher, more divine purpose for Mars in your life. I find that with Mars retrogrades over and over. Number 4 would be revisions of Mars, which we've already spoken about, but anything Mars-like that can go through a revision, even if Mars is signifying someone else. Mars is in your 10th house in Leo, and it's going to retrograde. Well, maybe your boss is going through some kind of psychological transformation. It doesn't necessarily have to be you. It could be Mars in the 7th house, a spouse, Mars in the 4th, a parent, Mars in the 5th, a kid. People around you may be going through shifts with respect to how powerful they feel or they don't feel, or other changes that really don't necessarily have anything to do with Mars. It's just that Mars signifies the person going through something that is the change, like a retrograde. For example, Mars retrograding in the 3rd house might be that you're witnessing or bearing witness to a sibling who's going through a major life transformation, like a divorce. It's the retrogradation in the 3rd can just suggest a significant period of transformation or revision for a sibling, right? So you can even think about it that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be something Marsy per se, although a divorce might be considered Marsy, I guess. But anyway, and number 5, and this is where I want to comment initially on the role of Leo. We have the sun, Mars in the sun's sign. So you think of the ego, you think of leaders, you think of paternal or solar figures, people that are luminescent or famous or that are military or governmental in their role or leadership. And you see them perhaps weakened or very significant fated events that are happening with respect to those figures that has a way of reversing or shifting their role or the way they show up or the way they lead or the way they're seen. So with Mars retrograde in Leo, you also think of the karma of fathers, leaders, paternal or solar figures, which could also be like a queen. But you see that shift happening with respect to their power or their role or their place or their pride or their ego or their fame, something like that. And so Mars's retrograde in Leo can mean like the return of the king from a displaced position. It could also mean the demotion of the king or the death of the king from like a position of tyranny. So it becomes open to interpretation and applicable in so many different contexts, what it might mean for Mars in the sign of the lion, right, to turn retrograde. There will be scenarios in which that shift of direction, role, presentation, visibility, status will show itself in different kinds of figures, with the retrograde of Mars being fitting for all of them. So it's a pattern that is multivalent is the point. So pay attention to those things as coming themes that we're going to be working with, which we're getting some foreshadowing on now as Mars is in Leo. You know, my other camera is out of battery today, so it's charging, and I'll be back on my other camera tomorrow. But anyhow, I hope that you're having a good week. And I've recorded this before any of the week's events have happened. So as you're listening to this, I'm like still sitting a week out from the election and everything that's happened this week. So it's interesting to make these videos and know that they might be speaking to things that are that have happened at this point. You know, it's like, wow. But anyhow, after I sign off, there's an informational video about the upcoming program. You know, there's a saying, and I think it comes from ancient Chinese culture, and I think it's considered a curse. It's like, may you live in interesting times. And I think it's considered to be like a kind of a curse. I think that there's an exception to that, which is that you're not cursed by that statement if you happen to live in interesting times and you have astrology. Because one of the things that astrology does is it allows for us to see these divine eternal patterns that are just as natural and vivid and beautiful as like a seashell. And it allows us to see them in the unfolding of the rise and fall of empires and the major cataclysms and shifts of history. It also allows us to see the patterns in the collective reality reflected in our own personal lives, our own little private kingdom, you know? And I feel like even if we're moving through an interesting period in our life, which is often, you know, they're often challenging, or an interesting period collectively, which may feel like a curse, astrology is a language that if you take the time to learn, it grants you that perspective. It's like, oh, reality is a burning bush and it's speaking to me and I ought to take my sandals off, you know? And that's why I do it. That's why I do it every day. This is my practice. Every day I get in this little room and I map out what I'm going to say, and I make a little altar fire in this video, and I hope the smoke rises up and is pleasing to these divine forces, and that it allows for the people who are listening to have ritual in their lives where we acknowledge and honor the divine presences that are a part of the unfolding of all things. When you have that, I really don't feel like you might live with a superficial feeling that you're living in a difficult time or a cursed time or like an unfortunate time or something. But this perspective is like a little magical umbrella. And so it's just a real honor to be sharing this. And I've been reflecting on this as I'm recording all of these a week out from what I'm sure is going to be a big week. On that note, I highly recommend you consider studying astrology. There is no better way, if you like astrology, to really deepen the connection with astrology and to intensify the connection such that it can act as an even greater catalyst for growth and healing on your personal path than to take up an apprenticeship at some point. Find a few teachers that resonate with you and study with them. And if that's you and this channel and my work, then I invite you to check out the upcoming program. Need-based tuition is available. So we try to make sure it's really accessible for people, but join us on a journey of taking this in at a very deep level over the next year, starting on November 16th. The informational video will be there after I sign off, and I hope to see some of you soon. Bye. Hey, everyone. I'm glad that you're sticking around to hear more about the Year 1 program that's coming up. The program starts on November 16th of this fall, and I am here today to tell you all that the program includes and why I think you really like it if you're thinking about studying astrology. So a few practical details about the course as well. The class begins November 16th, as I mentioned, but it takes place on Saturdays from 12 to about 2 or 3 p.m. Eastern time. So that's 11 to 2 Central, and typically classes are about 2 hours long. Sometimes they run over with Q&A and discussion, but you can always plan for about 2 hours and you won't miss any of the actual lecture content for the day. You may have to duck out a little early if Q&A or discussion is extending. Sometimes it does, which is why we say between 2 and 3 hours, but typically it's around 2. All of the classes are recorded, so if you can't attend live, you are more than welcome to watch the recordings at your own pace and on your own time. You have lifetime access to the recordings, and everything is housed on a student website. I want to actually give you just a little preview of what that student website looks like. So I am going to open up my own version of Thinkific, which is the platform that we use. So here's are some of my courses. These are all the Nightlight courses I teach. You can see on the page. But I'm going to tune into, let's go to Nightlight 28, which is the section that began in June of 2024. So here you're going to see that we have orientation instructions, course information, class links, and calendar. Everything that you need to know how to access the course is there, and you'll have a version of this in your own panel that you get set up with when you enroll. And then our lessons are laid out. So lesson 1, we have the video, the audio, the slides, the transcript. We have the Q&A box transcript so you can see what people were saying in the chat box during class. We have flashcards. We have a workbook. We have planet and sign glyph flashcards. We have bonus material, videos that we like from YouTube that we link you to. Say, check this video out, check that video out. They go along with some of the things we talked about in class. So every lesson has material for you to go as far as you want with, but the main thing is the video, audio, slides, transcript, etc. are all listed there so that you can download and watch it on your own time if you can't attend live. Again, the live classes do happen on Saturdays for this cohort, starting November 16th. That is our first day of class. And then going forward, it always meets on Saturdays, and we give you the class schedule to map out. And the breaks that we have, the study sessions that we have, everything's mapped out on the class calendar for you. So those are just a few practical details that, just to kind of start us off with. So I'm going to take you over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. And I'm going to share with you some information about the program and sort of walk you through what it includes and what you can expect. So it is an almost year-long program. We typically finish between 10 and 11 months out of the year. It can depend a little bit on some of my teaching and scheduling, because sometimes I teach at conferences and it may delay some of our modules by a week or something like that. But it's typically around 10 to 11 months that the program lasts. So we call it our first year program. At Nightlight, we have a program for absolute beginners. You may want to check that out if you are like brand spanking new. That would be 8 to 10 hours of content that's really meant to set you up for the first year course. We sort of assume that if you're coming into the first year program, you already know a little bit about astrology. For example, you have some familiarity with the signs, planets, and houses. Maybe you know what aspects are, but you want to learn more about what they are. But if you are really at the very total entry level space, then try Astrology for Beginners. And when you take that, you could do that right away and then join the first year course in November, and you'd be perfectly set up for it. But anyhow, in this program, over the course of about a year, we work through 30 lessons that I lead. And those lessons are all 2 to 3 hours each, including lecture, a little break, and a Q&A portion where we open up for people to come on mic and camera and ask questions and have an interactive discussion about the material for the day. The program is broken into modules that cover a variety of topics in ancient Hellenistic astrology. That is the earliest era of horoscopic astrology. And so if you don't know a lot about the different schools of astrology, Hellenistic astrology is going to be the kind of astrology that you see a lot of astrologers practicing nowadays. It's become more popular in the last 30 years or so. And that is due to the fact that a lot of ancient texts with some of the original techniques of horoscopic astrologers were recently translated into the English language, and it's created this renaissance in terms of the use of ancient approaches to astrology. I have a background in modern psychological, archetypal, and evolutionary astrology, and so of course I bring those things to the table, but the course is primarily focused on the excavation of ancient techniques and the spiritual philosophy that ancient astrologers also espoused. The closest thing that I can tell you to what that looks like is, ask this question: do you resonate with the philosophy that you hear me take on my YouTube channel? If so, then you're going to love this course in terms of its philosophical and spiritual approach, because the spiritual approach to astrology that I teach is really at the heart of the program. And that's a big part of my life. I approach astrology from a spiritual standpoint. It doesn't belong to one religion or one particular school of thought, but you will hear me talking about things like the soul, the belief in the transmigration of the soul. You'll hear me talk about the need to be soul-centered in our client approach to counseling in astrology. You'll hear me have an appreciation for psychological dimensions of astrology, but also ancient astrology is really very, very good at developing your predictive capacity. We talk about what kinds of predictions are appropriate, how to make appropriate predictions, how to be the right kind of astrologer for our clients without inducing any fear. So there's a lot of care that goes into the development of this craft. But ancient astrology is really amazing when it comes to honing your predictive abilities. And then what you'll find is in this program, there's also a pretty significant emphasis on the psychological dimensions and client care. Anyhow, we go into the roots of ancient Hellenistic astrology and its techniques in this program, and the 30 classes are broken into modules. We work through the history and philosophy. We work through planets, houses, signs, aspects, essential and accidental dignities, and then we get into approaches to the delineation of natal charts. And then at the end of the program, almost a third of the program is dedicated to live client readings, where you're going to see me meet with a person and apply what we've been studying for an hour-long reading. We take a break, we come back, and then we workshop. How did I do that? Why did I make these choices? How did I handle this or that came up in the reading? And it becomes easily the favorite part for most students of the entire program, because by that point, you've got so much theory that you're really ready to see it put into action. We alternate those live client practice sessions with hands-on practice, where students get to bring chart questions into class that we work on. And that's also something that most people really love. A lot of people will look at the curriculum and say, well, I already know planets, houses, and signs and aspects and dignities. But not if you haven't studied Hellenistic astrology, because the approach that ancient astrologers had to these topics is vastly different from the approach that modern astrologers take. So you will be, in a sense, relearning basic things in a brand new way. And I think a much more enriching, deep, and philosophically clear way. It's really nice to know the why behind things. This program and Hellenistic astrology in general is very good at helping you understand the why behind everything that we do. Also, it's really important to participate when you study astrology in a living lineage. So one of the reasons I don't let people jump ahead to my second or third year programs is because I want you to be entrained to a lineage, a particular way of doing things that comes from an astrologer who has a very living, busy, active practice and who has had teachers themselves. I think that's important for astrological learning. That's the model that my own learning take, and so that's what I really want students to take away from my programs. Anyhow, so all of that aside, the second year program focuses, after we build our understanding of the basic delineation techniques of birth charts, in year 2, we move into timing techniques, which is all about when the karma of a birth chart is going to be active and expressing itself throughout the course of a lifetime. That's year 2. Year 3 focuses on the development of counseling skills at a much deeper level. And then we also have a 1-year horary program, which is about the development of a very specific predictive technique that can be a really amazing tool to add to your kit. That is 4 years worth of training programs that we have. However, I want to mention that many people take our classes just for the sake, purely for the sake of their own personal growth. Taking these programs is very much like being taught how to utilize a technology that for yourself will be deeply useful for the rest of your life, and maybe for close friends or family members around you. Many people come through our programs taking that benefit away. We'll study through all 4 years of our programs with no intention of being professional. This is their hobby. This is a spiritual tool that will have it will pay dividends over a long period of time. However, many people without the intention to practice come into our courses and discover that they're actually good at it and may end up reading for other people part-time. And then there are students who are deeply, intensely motivated to practice for other people. And it is not that our programs really make those people successful. Our programs contribute to your development, but it really is that some people have a calling to practice professionally. And these programs are designed to give you all the tools you need to develop that confidence and to develop a really coherent set of tools and to entrain yourself to a lineage, which you can also develop your own unique style out of. So those are some of the kinds of people that take our programs, you might say. So the 30 classes on the year are then broken into modules. And in between modules, we have 2 course directors who are present in all of the classes, and they lead breakout tutoring sessions where you can come in and review or ask questions about the module that we've just completed, which is usually anywhere between 2 and 3 classes each. So those breakout study sessions led by our tutors are outside of the 30 classes and very useful. A lot of people like to attend those because they also offer opportunity for community and just lively conversation. We also have 12 online webinar classes led by guest teachers that we host throughout the year. Those are free, and if you can't make them live, they're all uploaded into your student folder. You also have an interactive group forum discussion staffed with tutors who typically respond to questions that you have about the material within 24 hours. So if you can't attend a tutoring session or you just have a random question on a Tuesday night, you can pop it in there and you'll get an answer. We also have a ton of bonus material, optional quizzes, flashcards, tons of supplemental material that is there to help people go as deeply as they want. We have a reading list that is expansive. And that reading list, we don't expect anyone to accomplish. It's more so a resource that we give you saying, here, if you want to know all the things I've read, if you want to know all the things that I love, if you want to know all the things I recommend, here's a master list of everything for each lesson. You could go, PhD level if you wanted to and read thousands and thousands of pages, or you might find that there's just one extra book that looks really interesting and you want to pick it up. But we pride ourselves on making sure you have a ton of resources. You have lifetime access to all the class recordings. You can email our staff or me throughout the year with questions, and my staff will also defer to me in the case that they don't know the answer to a question. So that is what the program includes. It starts November 16th. If you would like to join, at the bottom between now and October 15th, our early bird payments are available. So that saves you some money off the cost of the course. There is a 12-month installment plan that is cheaper than our normal plan, a one-time payment that's significantly cheaper than our normal one-time payment. So you get these little sales that we do until October 15th. We also have need-based tuition assistance. So if you are someone who would like to take this program, but you are on a fixed or tight budget, we have an application there. Click apply now. Just tell us what you need. We give a range. We say between this dollar amount and this dollar amount, what can you spend? And then we set you up with a plan for that tuition number per month. And that is available for anyone. We ask people to apply early because those spots are limited, but we are really accommodating. We try to make sure that nobody's priced out of a spiritual education. Like, this topic should be very accessible for people because I believe that the divine is speaking through the sky, and like anyone should have access to understanding what it's saying, right? So Anyway, that is a bit about the program. I hope that this has been useful for you. If there are any questions you have, you can look over the curriculum content on the page, on the year one page. There's more information there. Check out the FAQ section for more questions. Email us info@nightlightastrology.com. And I hope to see some of you in class soon. I think this is going to be a really powerful program because it's also starting right as Pluto's moving into Aquarius. And within the year, we're going to have a Uranus-Pluto trine with Uranus in Gemini. These Aries signatures and the connection between Uranus and Pluto make for a very powerful year to advance our understanding of astrology. So it's a great election year for studying. And I hope to see some of you in class soon.